boys and girls, and welcome to part 4 of the tour of Norway, where we are flying through the country of Norway while trying to share a couple of stories about some of the things we see. We have a flight in store for today, which I think is going to be quite interesting. I have been looking forward to it for a long time, and we'll get going very quickly. We'll have just a very quick look at the map, as we always do. So this is Europe, and this is Norway. And today we will be flying back east across these mountains to a place called Notodden. And we'll start here in Bergen, where we left off in the last video. And we'll fly over these fjords for a few minutes until we reach a place called Rosendal. And here we will make a left turn and come over these national parks. And this area has a lot of history, a lot of stories I'm going to try to share with you. And then we'll reach Møsvatn, where we will start a nice and smooth descent into the valleys of eastern Norway until we reach Notodden. So let's get going. Now I have a small surprise for today's video. I have installed for the entire flight something called Ortho4xp. And this was after a user left a comment in the last video that it would be nice to see all of this Norwegian scenery with a certain amount of photorealism. And I answered that I probably wouldn't do it due to some hardware issues. But I've spent some time now testing it out and trying to clear some space on my hard drive. So for the entire flight today, we will have ortho coverage, and I hope you'll be able to tell a little bit of a difference. So welcome back to Skies of Norway. Say goodbye to Bergen. One thing I neglected to tell you in the last video is that there is a helipad on this airport, where if you live on these islands, you will see a lot of shuttle traffic of Super Pumas and Eurocopter helicopters flying back and forth between the airport and the North Sea beyond here. And the reason is that this entire area beyond here is one of the largest oil and gas fields in all of Europe, and it's called the Troll A field. It's very important to the Norwegian economy and also important to Europe. Here you'll see a map of just a huge network of pipelines running from this area under the sea to various receiving stations all over Europe. So if you use gas in one way or another in Central Europe, it's quite likely that it was pumped out of the ground deep beneath this sea. Here you can see a little bit the difference with the ortho photo, but the difference becomes very evident when we reach the mountains. Over here is a town called Osøyro. It's a very small town. It has about 13,000 people living there. And one thing I can tell you about this little town is that right over here by the seaside, they have a very small shipyard called Oselvarverkstad. And it might not look like much, but it is a little bit special because the mostly old men of this little shipyard, they are maintaining an ancient wisdom of Norway, which is how to expertly use the properties of wood as material to build very, very flexible and sturdy ships. So these ships are built almost in the same way as the Vikings built their huge Viking ships, which were sophisticated enough that they could travel all over Europe all the way to the Middle East and also to America over 1,000 years ago. And the reason why I'm mentioning this is because I would argue that there is sort of continuity in the ship manufacturing, which started in this part of Norway over 1,000 years ago, and all the way up to the oil industry today. Because Norway continued to build ships all the way up until the 50s and 60s, when they built merchant freighters and stuff like that in a lot of shipyards all over the country. And then eventually, like in most of Europe, this industry moved mostly to Asia. But all of these shipyards, especially a very big one out here called Kværner Stord, they instead started working for the oil industry when the adventure started out here in the 70s. And one thing they invented here is a technology called Condeep. And the reason was that the very rough seas of the North Sea, it made it difficult to use traditional steel oil platforms as they used in the Mexican Gulf. So instead they started building these massive concrete structures. And the largest one is called Troll A, which you can see here. It's actually the largest movable man-made structure ever built. And it's as tall as a skyscraper. And what they did was that they towed it out here. I have no idea how they managed to keep it afloat and keep it from turning over. And then they towed it all the way out to where it was supposed to stand, and then they just filled its tanks with water so that it would sink to the bottom of the sea, where it still stands today. And then they also invented a technology here called horizontal drilling, which is a little bit like a drinking straw, where even though these platforms couldn't really be moved much again, you could sort of send out these pipelines horizontally and then still cover a very large area. So I think today there is quite a lot of pride in Norway about some of the technological feats invented by the oil industry, and also a lot of gratitude for the immense impact it has had on the Norwegian economy. But I also think that it's slowly becoming a little bit more cooled off. I think people are also feeling a little bit of apprehension about the oil industry. I think most Norwegians are quite aware that oil, both globally and locally, is not exclusively a good thing. And especially going forward, I think a lot of Norwegians will argue that oil industry at least shouldn't be as big of a part of it as it has been. Especially as these oil fields over here are now slowly depleting. The politicians, they really want to expand in the north, the Barents Sea, which is of course possibly another quick source of revenue, but I also know that especially the local people are a little bit frightened due to how the nature over there is extremely vulnerable. And if one accident were to happen, then the fish industry and the tourism industry could suffer immensely. So it's going to be exciting going forward to see how big of a role the oil industry will keep playing in Norway's economy. This over here is called Knudsen, and it's a nature reserve, one of the largest in this part of the country. And it has a lot of small lakes and swamps, which are very good for what we call great salamander, or I think maybe it's called newt in English. They love these wet environments, and they're almost extinct species because they're the areas where they like to live, they are usually turned into farms. But over here, they still thrive, and this is the largest population of them in the world. And the mountain you see in the background of this picture is right over here. It's called Ulvanosa. It's the most prominent mountain in these lands. Over here we are coming up on a place called Rosendal, which has a little bit of an interesting history, which dates back all the way to the 1650s. Back then there was a Danish nobleman called Ludvig Rosenkrantz, who, as far as I've understood, was a quite handsome and talented, charming young man, but he was a little bit down on his luck when it came to his family's personal finances. So he got an appointment from the Danish king to travel here to Norway, to Trondheim, to reconquer it from the Swedes. Now, famously, a few years earlier, the Swedish king Gustav Adolf had walked over the ice from Sweden to Denmark and laid siege to Copenhagen, threatening the Danish king. And in order to make peace, the king had to give the Swedes a lot of land all over Scandinavia, including Trondheim. That was until this nobleman Ludwig came here and reconquered it in 1658. After that he went to celebrate in Bergen, and lo and behold, he luckily met the daughter of the richest man in Norway, who owned 550 farms in Norway back then. And her name was Karen Mobat. And as a wedding present, they got a huge farm right here, where the Danish king named it a barony in honor of this guy's achievements. And if you travel around Europe, you'll find these baronies and dukedoms and whatever you call them all over. But in Norway, they're very, very rare, because this was so far from where things were happening back then. So as far as I know, this is the only barony in all of Norway, and they built this huge Renaissance style garden around the palace, which in and of itself is maybe not unique, but its location between these mountains is very unique. And later, all of these artists that I've been talking about in the previous videos, Ibsen, Grieg, Ole Bull, they would all come here and use this farm as a sort of artist retreat. Today it's a museum, and the foundation which owns the museum, it does some charity and owns some sort of idealistic property around Norway, and the building I'm sitting in right now is actually owned by this foundation. Over here we are coming up on Folgefonna, which is the third largest glacier in Norway. And it is not left over from the last ice age. It appeared about 5,000 years ago, when the temperature fell a little bit in this area. But like Jostedalsbreen in the second video, it is now slowly disappearing. All of these arms over here are slowly retreating each year. And the composer I mentioned in the last video, Geir Tveit, who grew up in this fjord and wrote a lot of music about these lands, he has written a piece of music about this glacier of Folgefonna, which is called Folgefonna fortel ingenting, or the glacier of Folgefonna keeps its secrets. So now, for a very short while, we will listen to this piece while we continue on our route. was Geir Tveit's epic piece about these majestic and mysterious glaciers. We are now coming up on Odda, which in a way you could call it one of the very first cities in the world where modern tourism started. The Gran Canaria of the 1800s, because at least this is the first place in Norway where tourists from other countries started coming. It was mostly from the UK. English noble men and women would sail across the North Sea into this valley, and the reason why they came here was of course to see this this glacier that we just passed, and also to visit a very famous waterfall called Låtefossen, which is located right up here. And Wilhelm II, the German emperor that I mentioned in the last video, he also came here regularly. And this little tourism industry with a lot of hotels and a lot of stuff happening up here, it lasted until the First World War, when the tourists stopped coming for obvious reasons. And then this small town over here, Odda, it became one of the most important cities of industry in Norway instead. The reason is that it has a lot of waterfalls coming down from all of these mountains, which make it very easy to power factories over here. And a local guy invented something called the Odda process, which is a chemical process to use a lot of energy to manufacture fertilizers. So a lot of steel factories and also these fertilizer factories made this little town very rich, but also less interesting for tourists, perhaps. Back then, a lot of this industry was really built with architecture in mind. So a lot of these factories are really, really beautiful. Over here you can see the main factory island. And over here is one of the power plants that gave electricity to all of this going on here. As you can see, it's very beautiful. It's called Tyssedal. This town, as many other industrial towns in Norway, doesn't have much industry anymore. So it has had some problems with a lot of people moving and somewhat struggling economy. But due to this quite interesting industrial heritage and also the nature around them, they are, like many of these former industrial towns, trying to turn these former industrial districts into cultural districts. I think due to its location, this town of Odda has a pretty good chance to become a popular tourist destination again. Here you can see one of these hundreds of dams that lie a little bit further up in the mountains from the power plants, and these lakes, they act as reservoirs for the power plants. Some 98% of all the electricity in Norway comes from hydroelectricity dams like this one. So this is one of the reasons why, for example, Tesla, the car manufacturer, is very successful in Norway, because electricity is very cheap and renewable in Norway. Now over here on the mountainside here is one of the most famous sort of postcard places in all of Norway. If you ever go to a kiosk in Norway, you'll see this place on half of all the postcards you can buy. And it's called Trolltunga, or the tongue of the troll, which as you can see is quite befitting. And if you ever decide to come here, it's a very tough walk, some 8 to 10 hours down from the village to get up here. But it's well worth it due to just the amazing beauty of this very strange scenic spot. But please be careful if you ever decide to come here. You will fall straight down from this plateau. There is nothing to protect you, and after walking for 8 to 10 hours, you are very tired and careless. And I know that a few years ago there was a very terrible accident here involving an exchange student. So please be careful. Now I bid you welcome to Hardangervidda, which is the largest mountain plateau in all of Northern Europe. It's going to be a substantial part of today's flight. And it stretches all the way from here and far into eastern Norway. And the best way I could describe how this place looks like in real life is to say that to me it looks almost exactly the same as Rohan, the horse kingdom, as it is depicted in the Lord of the Rings movies. Of course those movies were shot in New Zealand, but if it weren't for the tax incentives, they might as well have shot them here, because it looks very similar. Another movie reference I could give you to sort of give you a grasp of this area is that it acts as the ice planet of Hoth in Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And all of those scenes in that movie, they were shot here, or a little bit further north by the train station where the Bergen line runs through. And famously, Harrison Ford, when he came here to shoot those scenes, there was a huge blizzard, as you can see in the movie, and in order to get him up here in time, they had to put him on this special snow train. And all of the Imperial and Rebel soldiers that you see in the background of those scenes, those are local Norwegians from this area. So Hardangervidda, it's around 8,000 square kilometers, and as you can see over here in the west, it's very rocky, and then down here it's more grassy. And this mountain plateau has the only remaining population left in Europe of wild reindeer. It's about 12,000 animals. During the summertime, you'll find them down here in the grasslands, and in the wintertime they'll be down here, and in the summertime they'll come up here to eat reindeer moose, moss. This mountain plateau is where people of the east of Norway and the west of Norway, they would travel back and forth since as long as people lived in these lands. And there would also be a few trading camps all over these mountains where they could meet and exchange goods. And these ancient paths that they would walk to get over the mountains, they still exist, and apparently you can see them when you fly over the Hardangervidda. So since this is actual satellite imagery, we should technically be able to see those ancient paths somewhere. Maybe they're here, but I do think that they're a little bit further north. This place is very popular for hiking, both in the summer and the winter with skis. For example, my parents, when they got married, their idea of a honeymoon was to just walk around here with a tent for days. So as you understand, Norwegians can be quite strange sometimes. But it's very beautiful. This is the very southern part of the Hardanger Plateau, and over here you can see how it slowly descends into some valleys. These valleys here and also over on the eastern side of Norway, they are some of the most isolated valleys in all of Norway. So the people who live in these valleys, and also very famously in the valley of Setesdal over here, they have a very strange dialect, because people there lived so isolated that they didn't change that much how they spoke since the Viking ages compared to the rest of the country. And they would also keep building houses here, which were very similar to how the Vikings built their houses, for much longer than the rest of the country. Right about now we are flying into the province of Telemark, which starts about here and it runs all the way down to the sea. And we're leaving the province of Hordaland, which is where Bergen lies. And Telemark has a very long and interesting history. It's said to be, or historically it was said that the people there were extremely independent and violent. A bishop called Øystein Aslaksson actually wrote in 1395 that the farmers of Telemark were unchristian and incredibly violent, and that they didn't pay a single dime of taxes. And the reason, of course, was that it was very difficult for these tax collectors to go into these valleys and argue that these independent farmers should pay to the state. And most of the farmers in Telemark, they actually own their own farms, as opposed to the most farmers in the medieval ages who just worked for some nobleman. And actually, about a third of all the legal documents concerning murder from this period comes from this part of the country. And it's speculated that maybe due to the isolatedness of these valleys, the people kept their Viking honor culture for much longer than the rest of the country, which basically meant that you had to kill to defend your honor. But another theory is just that more legal documents from Telemark are preserved than in the rest of the country. But Telemark also has a lot of resources, mining resources, and also a lot of waterfalls that are important to industry. And about 100 years ago, two very famous Norwegians called Sam Eide and Christian Birkeland. You'll hear their names everywhere in Norway. They have streets named after them, and also Christian Birkeland, a physicist. He is the face on the 200 kroner note, if you ever get your hands on Norwegian money. And they came here into Telemark, where they found a lot of waterfalls and thought that they would be perfect to run their industrial adventure, because they had also invented a chemical process called Birkeland-Eide process, which was also a way to manufacture fertilizers. And the company they started, Norsk Hydro, became up until the oil industry, really one of the main engines of the Norwegian economy. And in Rjukan, which is where we're flying now, they started this factory, which was powered by something called Rjukanfossen, or Rjukan waterfall. And this was using this chemical process that they invented. And a side effect of this chemical process was that you got something called deuterium oxide, or D2O, which means it's a sort of water. It's called heavy water, actually. It's just like regular water, except for the fact that it has an extra neutron in its atomic core. And I don't think they had much use for this special type of water, so they just put it in tanks. Until right before the Second World War, when the Deuxième Bureau in Paris, the French military intelligence, they asked this factory if they could send their heavy water to Paris just for safekeeping, so the Germans couldn't get it. Because about this time, people started realizing that you could use heavy water to slow the fission process in a nuclear reactor, which you would need to build an atomic bomb. So the concern was that if the Germans got their hands on this heavy water from Rjukan, they would build an atomic bomb. But then just a few months later, after they sent this heavy water for safekeeping, the Germans took both France and Norway. So now they had their hands on the reservoirs of heavy water, and also the only factory in the world which produced heavy water. So around 1942, British military intelligence started inventing a plan to destroy this factory, which is right over here, to sort of make sure that the Germans couldn't build an atomic bomb. And they invented a very complicated plan, which started with something called Operation Grouse. And then in November of 1942, an airplane flew in over here and landed 4 Norwegians in parachutes.
How do we get back to Norway?
The simplest way, by parachute.
These Norwegians, they were locals who had fled to England and joined the SOE, Special Operation Executive, and they knew these lands quite well. But as you can see, it's not very easy to navigate by visual markers over this mountain plateau, so they were dropped way over here, and their destination was this lake, and they had tons of equipment. So for days, on very low rations, they had to ski. This was in the middle of the winter, back and forth, to a cabin over here somewhere, where they would build a base of operations. And after about a month without any contact with London, they finally managed to rig their radio and call to London and say, they were asked, what did you see in the early morning of the day? And they replied, 3 pink elements, which meant that they were ready for part 2 of the operation. So in London they were ecstatic, and this meant the beginning of something called Operation Freshman. So what they did over here, next to this little cabin, they built a landing field in the middle of the snow. Then one night, after 1 month, they waited for the English to come in with 50 commando soldiers on 2 bomber airplanes, which were carrying or towing these Horsa gliders.
Listen!
I still can't believe it.
They weren't even Norwegian.
50 British commandos.
A flash, the whole operation's over.
So what happened was that these airplanes with the English, they flew in over this mountain plateau, and they had both a radio beacon and artificial runway that they had built to navigate by, but the weather turned so sour that they just couldn't see it. So the Norwegians, they could hear the airplane, but the airplane couldn't see them. So they flew around in circles all over this mountain plateau until the towing cables, they froze to ice. So 3 out of the 4 airplanes, they crashed in Norway, and a lot of people died in the crash, and the ones who didn't die, they were captured very quickly by the Gestapo and tortured and executed very tragically. So the plans for the operation were also found. So these few Norwegians over here, they had to take all their equipment and retreat back into the mountains without any supplies, where they had to live for months just eating reindeer moss and trying to hunt for animals. So they were very close to starvation. The English invented a new plan called Operation Gunnerside. So after about 3 months, they flew in again and dropped more supplies and also some more Norwegians. And it was a much smaller team than originally intended. There were about 10 guys, I believe, as opposed to the 50 commando soldiers that they intended to use. And then in 1943, they skied all the way down to this valley here, which is where the factory is located. And they had an insider in the factory who could give them the guard schedule and the layout of the plant. And they managed to find this very steep ravine which they could climb to avoid a bridge, which was the main entrance to the factory. And they managed to sneak all the way in and destroy the heavy water production facility. And then they retreated in the same night back into these mountains, and they split into 3 teams. One team skied from here all the way through the mountains and into Sweden, which was neutral, where they could travel back to London. Another team went to Oslo to join the resistance there, and a few more guys went back into the mountains to keep observing the heavy water factory and what would happen after the sabotage. And it was a very, very successful mission. Winston Churchill apparently said that it was, I think, one of the most successful sabotage missions of the entire war. And the Germans, they sent 3,000 soldiers into these mountains to hunt for the saboteurs, and this involved a lot of chases through the mountains with skis, and it's very sort of Hollywood stuff, even though it's all true. So I've actually been using audio from a film called The Heroes of Telemark from the 60s. It was a Hollywood film about this, and I've also been using pictures from a Norwegian television show called Kampen om Notodden. But all of these movies, they're a little bit too sort of too heroic in a way. but the BBC actually made a really cool show with Ray Merce, where they try to recreate this mission. And you'll find a link below if you're interested in more details about this mission during the war. But what they discovered after just a few months was that the Germans very quickly managed to rebuild the destroyed production facility. So it was then decided to fly in with, I believe, 700 bombers from the US Air Force into this valley to bomb the factory, which is located right here. So all of these bombers, they managed to destroy the factory again, and then the Germans decided to stop the production of heavy water in this town, and they transported their last supplies of heavy water back to Germany. So this is the town of Rjukan. Like Odda, it has a very proud architectural history with a lot of beautiful factories, but as you can see, it's very deep in this valley. And during the summertime, they actually the wintertime, they actually get no direct sunlight. So very famously, they actually built a mirror up on the mountain here to reflect some sunlight down on the town square over here. But I have been here, and I think this town is really interesting and beautiful, and the people here are very proud of their town. But like Odda, it doesn't have much industry anymore, and it's trying to become sort of a tourist destination instead. And of course, right above the town is this majestic mountain called Gaustatoppen, which is the tallest mountain in all of this part of Norway. And if you stand on the top there, and it's a clear day like today, you can see for 200 kilometers in every direction, meaning that you can see so much of Norway but basically the part you see of Norway is larger than all of the country of Denmark, for example. And you can see almost all the way over to Sweden and Denmark beyond the sea. So naturally, this is a very important landmark, and wherever you go in eastern Norway, you'll always see this mountain somewhere on the horizon, and it has a lot of tourism in the summertime. Now, when the Germans decided to transport the last remaining heavy water back to Germany, they took it on a train line down this valley into this lake over here, and they put the train on a boat. And the saboteurs that were left in the mountains, they knew about this, so they snuck up on that boat and they put explosives on the boat, and it sank in this lake. So that was really the end, or the final nail to the coffin of the German nuclear arms program. But of course, today we know that the Germans were so far behind compared to the Americans that they probably never would have managed to make an atomic bomb before 1945. Even if they hadn't managed to destroy the factory, they probably still wouldn't have had enough heavy water. But still, they didn't know that back then, so it's still a very impressive and important act of sabotage. And I think this story about these Norwegian saboteurs, it's well, as I said, it's been a couple of movies both in Norway and America, and it's a very well-known story in Norway. And I think especially after the war, those sort of heroic stories were an important part of the healing process, to sort of comfort each other that Norway also played a part in the role, and to a certain extent helped stopping the Germans. But I think something which is easily forgotten when we tell those heroic stories is how a lot of Norwegians also collaborated with the Nazis. And the factory, for example, which produced this heavy water, it made a lot of profit by selling to the Nazis. This is something that people wanted to forget about after the war, but I think today it's being talked about a lot more. And this television show called Kampen on Tungtvannet, which I've been using for some of these photos I've shown you, it was made a couple of years ago to celebrate it's been the 50th year anniversary for the sabotage mission. And this show, like the American movie, is a little bit too black and white in a way, but it did try to show also how there was a lot of collaboration and cynical sort of search for profit among the Norwegians as well. Anyways, we are now descending into the valleys of Telemark. We are very close to the end of our destination. And this valley here is called Heddal. And there is an interesting story about this valley. They have a very famous church, which I'll show you right before we land. And there is a legend that this church was built in only 3 days. So the story goes that the local farmers, they really wanted to build a church, but they didn't know exactly how they would go about it. And then one day they would meet this very strange, mysterious man who would offer to build the church for them if they could do one of 3 things. They either had to give him the sun and the moon, which of course is impossible, or they would have to sacrifice their blood, or they would have to guess his name. And they reasoned that it's going to take months or years to build this church, so we're sure we can guess this guy's name before he finishes the church. So they agreed, but this mysterious guy, he built the church very quickly, in only 3 days. And on the last day, they were getting very nervous that they would have to sacrifice their blood because they still hadn't been able to guess his name. So one of those farmers, Rauderygi, he went on a solemn walk into this mountain or this mountain, I don't know exactly which one, to sort of, I don't know, think about the end of his life. And then he would hear strange singing from deep within the mountain. And he heard a sort of a song going something like, "Hush, hush, little child, tomorrow Finn will come with the moon and sun, and he won't spare the Christian heart for fun and play." That's a terrible translation on my part of this Norwegian song from the Middle Ages. And upon hearing this song, he realized 2 things. This mysterious Finn, he is a troll, and he lives within this mountain over here. And his name is Finn. So the next day when the troll came, they said your name is Finn, and thus they had solved the riddle, and they had gotten a new church in only 3 days without sacrificing their blood. And this church, it is located right next to the landing field here for Notodden, where we're going. I think it's over here, and it is the largest stave church left in the world. It's really, really beautiful. So this town of Notodden has its own interesting industrial history. It's an industry town founded by these guys, SimHeaven and Christian Birkeland. But just visiting this church is a pretty good reason to come here. So now we'll be coming in for landing at Notodden Airport, and it is the only commercial airport in this province of Telemark. And it actually has a road running straight through the runway, just like the airport in Gibraltar, if you're familiar with that. Welcome to Notodden. I think for today we're going to go downtown and listen to some blues music, maybe, because Notodden has one of the largest blues festivals in all of Norway. So that was it for this time. I really hope you thought some of this video was interesting and that it was enjoyable. We are now coming very close to the end of the tour of Norway, and I hope you will catch the last video when we're going to travel here from Notodden through the main population center of Norway, where some 2 million people live, to Oslo, the capital, which is also my hometown, so I'm gonna have to try to do something special for that video. So that was it. Thank you for watching, and I hope I see you next time. Goodbye.